The European Green Deal is Europe's new growth strategy. We have to act now.
The European Commission has prepared 3 concrete actions that will offer a strong basis for the New Deal.
I want Europe to become the first climate-neutral continent in the world by 2050.
Real benefits include zero pollution, affordable and secure energy, smarter transport, and high-quality food.
A Just Transition Fund will leverage public and private money, including with the help of the European Investment Bank.
All these will contribute to a global Green Deal. No one will be left behind.
We will deliver a sustainable Europe investment plan.
Our €1 trillion of investment would give investors confidence to make long-term decisions on environmentally responsible projects. This will mean new jobs, a cleaner environment, and a better quality of life for people.
We Europeans are ready.
Welcome and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning on the EU Green Deal and what it means for Ireland, which we are happy to organise together with the European Movement Ireland. I'm Gerry Kiely. I'm head of the European Commission representation here in Dublin, and I'm joined remotely by 3 very well qualified people to address the subject we are dealing with this morning. And I'm delighted to see with such a high turnout. I think we've something of the order of 360 participants this morning, which shows a high level of interest in this subject, which we're very, very happy about. It's nearly, I think it's December last year, the European Commission put forward the proposal or the document on the Green Deal. Which is not a proposal in itself, it's more of a framework and a roadmap in terms of addressing climate change and environmental challenges. The roadmap is being fleshed out progressively over time with more detail, and the intention is to put the EU in the lead. It is putting the EU in the lead in terms of addressing climate change and the environmental challenges we have today. When we see today the challenge global governments have in dealing with COVID-19, we realise, when we're up against nature, we always come out second best. We know the implications of climate change. We know the disaster that faces society, faces mankind if we don't address it, and we know how to address it. So the clock is ticking. We need to address it, and the Green Deal is the EU's answer in terms of addressing that, and we are the lead in the world in fighting climate change, and we intend to progress and bring others along with us. I could mention, since I have the floor here, I would like to use this opportunity to mention the European Commission Representation's Green Deal campaign, which we launched this week. It's called Keeping Ireland Green. We've 12 stories about the EU and Ireland and various projects which are taking place around Ireland, funded by the EU, again, addressing various aspects of climate change. Back to our webinar. Today, the aim of this webinar is to gain a better understanding of the issues facing us, and we want to hear comments and questions about the Green Deal. It's an opportunity to understand better the Green Deal, the objectives and where it's going. In terms of the practicalities, we have about an hour and a quarter. Throughout the discussion, you can put forward your questions to the speakers. Use what's called Slido. I think it's on the screen there. You go to Slido, www.sli.do, and enter hashtag EU Green Deal to join the event and to submit your questions. That's it. As I say, we have 3 eminent speakers to deal with the subject and to take your questions. The first speaker will be from Brussels, Joanna Drake. Joanna Drake has been the Deputy Director General of the European Commission's Director General for the Environment since March 2016. In this role, she's in charge of the coordination of resource efficiency policies and other legal instruments. She also chairs a cross-cutting task force spearheading strategic positions for the DG on, among other issues, post-2020 Commission financial framework negotiations, Brexit coordination, the urban agenda, and the future-proofing of the EU's environmental acquis. So clearly, Joanna, you're a very busy lady, so we're delighted to have you here this morning. By training, Joanna is a Doctor of Laws from the University of Malta, where she also lectured full-time in the Department of European and Comparative Law. She acquired a postgraduate degree in Advanced European Legal Studies from the College of Europe in Bruges in Belgium. Joanna, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gerry, and good morning to all. Well, I'm not surprised that you have so many participants in this, given that Eurobarometer surveys in Ireland keep pushing up a good figure of 93%, the latest one, of Irish people saying that they perceive that protecting the environment is important, and that they perceive that climate change and environmental degradation is a key issue facing the EU and the world, I would say. But back to the Green Deal, Gerry, for a few words on that. And maybe I know that you already had the video with our President von der Leyen, but I'd like to refer specifically to a quote from her when she was, speaking to the world about the context. And the context is COVID crisis, and at the same time, the fragility of the humans, of life, but also the strength of the human spirit. And she said that this virus is 1,000 times smaller than a grain of sand, and it has exposed how delicate life is. It has laid bare also the fragility of our health systems, and also the limits of a model that values wealth above well-being. And I think this is a very key quote there, because it explains it explains the context very, very well, and therefore it actually should actually leap us into action, and really all together into action, all sectors of society and all sectors of industry to work together, also to help our planet not to be as fragile as we have made it to be. So there is no doubt that the biggest urgency that we're facing is the future of mankind on our fragile planet. And while we were all in lockdown, we were watching, very devastating scenes as well, not only of the bare streets, because, there was no business going on, but also of the glacier collapse in Mont Blanc, about also the fires burning through Oregon, and also the crops destroyed in Romania by the most severe droughts in decades. But we also saw nature coming back into our lives, and that's the positive side. And I think all of us are a little bit more motivated into appreciating not only the green spaces next door, but also the cleaner air, which is really good for our mental health and physical well-being. We know that change is needed, and we also know it is possible. And because we know it's possible, the European Union has established a blueprint, the European Green Deal, to achieve this transition, if you like, of society and the economy. And I think the whole idea is that the European continent, as the President said, needs to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And in order to achieve this, we had to fix targets. And we have to also look at increasing those interim targets for 2030 to 55% of emission reduction. And to this effect, we will revise all EU climate and energy legislation by next summer, next 2021, to make it, so to speak, fit for 55. It will enhance emission trading, it will boost renewable energy, it will improve energy efficiency, and also reform energy taxation. But of course, the European Green Deal, as we know, is not only about climate, it's also about biodiversity strategy, it's about farm to fork. And also the ongoing work already of zero pollution strategy to be presented next year. But putting this now in the Irish context, I already have referred to the huge number of people in Ireland who really want to have much more action on protection of the environment. So how is Ireland faring in this regard? Well, we do have monitoring stations, if you like, both in Brussels and also in Copenhagen through the Environmental Agency, the European Environmental Agency. And some of the issues that Ireland needs to address urgently are the following. One is the reducing of greenhouse gas emissions by increasing renewable energy resources and addressing those sectors that have continued to see emissions rise in recent years, notably transport and agriculture. Secondly, the tackling of biodiversity loss and protecting Ireland's unique peat resources to make full use of its carbon storage and biodiversity functions. And of course, discussions are ongoing with Ireland to see what can be achieved under the Just Transition Fund, in particular for the Midlands. Thirdly, investing in upgrading water infrastructure. And water, of course, and also the use of ensuring that wastewater is correctly treated, that leakage is reduced, and that drinking water is also safe. And lastly, farming techniques need to be improved in order to reduce emissions to surface waters and ammonia emissions to air. Of course, I mean, it's not a surprise that many of the environmental challenges that we see with Ireland are from rural activities, in particular from peat extraction and also agriculture. And I am aware that recently there have been quite a lively debate in the Irish press about the impacts of dairy farming. And I note that certain farming groups feel that the blame is being unfairly apportioned onto them. My observation on this would be that we cannot avoid having these discussions, of course. An open dialogue must be first and foremost the way forward on how we can find solutions. We have been working with Ireland, of course, as EU to manage these challenges. And I'm therefore very pleased to learn about the compilation, which I was given yesterday as well, of the success stories that the European Commission's representation in Ireland has put together in order to give a flavour of the different actions that have taken place in order to make the necessary transition to sustainability, well-being and resilience. I think that the whole point about these success stories is that it makes it look doable. It makes it look like next door. It is practical. It can be done. And it can be done in every sector in Ireland, whether it's about tackling climate change, whether it's about endangered species, whether it's about promoting sustainable farming techniques, cleaning up oceans and boosting recycling. And of course, this is also ensuring a better path to health, welfare and security for current and future generations. I really hope that these stories will really resonate with many parts of the population and many different sectors, economic sectors, in order to do their bit. As I said at the beginning, we all have to work together to decarbonize our economy, our continent, and also our planet. So just to conclude, I mean, there are many stories there that maybe one could highlight, like the raised bogs, for instance, and the dairy farms. And I really encourage you to have a look at this booklet. But in conclusion, I would like to say that we have to take it all forward by example, not just words. It's about action. It's not just willing it. It's about doing something about it. And I think in leading this, we also have to bear in mind our responsibility to the world, that we need to be seen to be embracing, but we need to be also making the difference. So very much so in this spirit, I look forward to discussion today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Joanna. And as you say, it very much is about deeds rather than words. Now, on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Jonathan Durham. Jonathan is currently the head of the EPA evidence program, which includes the Environmental Research Program, Environmental Analytics, Strategic Environmental Assessment, and the State of Our Environment Reporting Unit. Jonathan has 30 years' experience in the public and private sector in Ireland and Europe. Through his professional career, Jonathan has gained direct experience in a wide range of environmental policy areas in both the national and European arenas, and has previously led EPA activity in circular economy, resource efficiency, climate change, industrial regulation, environmental liabilities, mining and waste management. Over his career, Jonathan has represented the state in Europe across many policy areas and at UN COP meetings. Jonathan, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gerry, and good morning, everyone. And I do extend my apologies from our Director General, Laura Burke, who is unavailable today. I thank the European Commission's Ireland Office, of course, and the European Movement Ireland for the invitation to join with this very accomplished panel of speakers. So the Green Deal, what does it mean for Ireland? I will take the challenge in the context of my work here in the agency in Ireland, and we'll start by outlining some of the pressures our environment faces. And that's really to kind of confirm a lot of Joanna's comments in her presentation. And then I will look to see what the Green Deal might be able to deliver as regards addressing these. We're shortly to publish a comprehensive 4-year assessment of the state of Ireland's environment. While not wanting to preempt too much of what this assessment will reveal, I can say that we have enduring challenges in relation to water and air quality, biodiversity loss, resource efficiency, resilience to climate disruption, underdeveloped environmental and transport infrastructure, urbanization pressures, greenhouse gas emissions, as well as harms that flow from our unsustainable production and consumption practices. Our performance against the requirements of EU policy is mixed. As of August 2020, there were 16 infringement cases and 4 European court cases open against us for breaches of environmental law. There are many notable positives too, and the booklet that the Ireland Commission's Office have produced certainly is an indication of many of those. But as to those positives, I would be hopeful too that the Green Deal will ensure ongoing protection and reinforcement of these achievements, that they don't get lost in the rush to deal with the harms. When you look at the challenges I have outlined here, and then the scope of the Green Deal, there is a remarkable alignment of issues. In this regard, the Green Deal is prescient or knowing in its ambition for Europe. Our challenges here in Ireland are also those of many of our partners in the Union. In the time that I have, I will look at just a few of the Green Deal policy initiatives that I believe have the potential to be of significant importance. So firstly, with the climate action in the Green Deal, one of the main planks of this multi-strand area is the proposed climate law, which has the stated aim to establish, as Joanna said, an integrated framework across all policy areas for the irreversible and gradual reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and enhancements of removals by natural and other sinks in the Union. Ireland has been accused of being a laggard in climate actions, and our greenhouse gas emissions do confirm our underachievement. We are certainly not pulling our weight in Europe in this matter, and we are having to buy our way into compliance through purchasing allowance. This is money that could have been used to retrofit homes or deal with flood defences, and so is a lost opportunity. The longer we delay, the more expensive it is to turn things around. It is more than meeting our targets, though. The real goal in the face of climate disruption is a resilient and stable society and economy that is carbon neutral via its own efforts and natural attributes. What we recognise time and time again is that EU policy that is underpinned by robust legal provisions with targets and sanctions is the most effective way to assure the appropriate national response and enduring commitment. We already see the influence of the Green Deal in the recently published climate bill, and I'm therefore confident that the climate law will assist in delivering success and better economic and well-being outcomes for citizens. And it will allow us to play a more positive part as a member of the Union in delivering collective objectives on climate. So the Green Deal and eliminating pollution. Each year in Ireland, it's estimated about 1,300 citizens die prematurely from poor air quality. That's 4 people by the end of today. And 300 get lung cancer from radon exposure. And there's only a 20% 5-year survival rate for lung cancer. A great many more suffer nuisance, stress, and disruption from noise, pollution, and other environmental factors. Our drinking water supplies are regularly cut off and beaches closed, both due to pollution. Ammonia emissions from intensive agriculture have measurable negative impacts on our ecosystems. Plastics in our marine environment is a growing concern, and alarmingly, recent published research has found microplastics in air samples taken along the western seaboard of the country. So plastics are in the air we breathe. Pesticides and herbicides used in land management and farming are being detected in our surface waters. In built-up areas, the combustion of solid fuels in domestic fireplaces is putting pollutants into the air that impact our health. An EPA-funded research is finding highly toxic antibiotic-resistant bacteria in our natural environment, due largely to poor practices in animal and human healthcare. So in light of this, the Green Deal commitment to a toxic-free environment has to be welcomed. This area of the Green Deal aims to protect Europe's citizens and ecosystems through better monitoring, reporting, prevention, and remedying of pollution from air, water, soil, and consumer products. To achieve this, Ireland will be required to look more systematically at all sectoral policies and regulations. So turning then to the Green Deal and agriculture. Assessments undertaken by the EPA confirmed that agricultural practices in Ireland are one of the main agents responsible for the decline in water quality. Moreover, the sector is responsible for 1/3 of national greenhouse gas emissions and 99% of national ammonia emissions. I do recognise the argument that on a kilogram output basis, we can produce beef at lower carbon than most. But the excess use of fertiliser to force our grass, resulting in emissions to air and the loss of highly polluting nutrients to water, as well as the damage to ecosystems and biodiversity, cannot be ignored in the debate as to what is sustainable. It is recognised that on an individual farm and farm type basis, there can be evidence of exemplary and low impact practice. However, taking the sector as a whole, its economic growth is happening at the expense of the environment. Business as usual in agriculture will not reverse these trends. The Green Deal commits member states to work with the Commission and stakeholders so as to ensure that from the outset, the national strategic plans for agriculture fully reflect the ambition of the Green Deal and its farm to fork strategy. And this is not the case currently. I have great hopes that the Green Deal will be a watershed moment in national agri-food policy, both on the production side, through driving sustainable stocking, safeguarding biodiversity and reducing significantly the use and risk of chemical pesticides, as well as the use of fertilizers and antibiotics. And on the consumption side, through tackling the shameful 1 million tonnes of food waste generated in the state each year. And then the last area is the green finance and the Green Deal. It is in this area of sustainable finance that I hold much optimism. It's one thing I've learned over 30 years in environmental policy, is that if you get the money right, the environment gets sorted. The Green Deal policy area has the potential to significantly alter investment and public finance decisions in Ireland, as well as production and consumption decisions, in ways that promote resilient and sustainable economies and societies. The Green Deal ambitions around the application of the Green Taxonomy, the non-financial reporting directive for companies, standardization of natural capital accounting practices, and the use of green budgeting tools are all really very significant. Research activity funded by the EPA and undertaken by ESRI, and also other work by CSO, have here in Ireland identified national taxation reliefs and subsidies that are harmful to the environment. This is equivalent to the state funding cancer prevention while sponsoring smoking advertisements. It just makes no sense that we would design a public tax code that actively harms the environment and, by extension, the health of our citizens. It is imperative as we emerge from the pandemic crisis in Ireland and look to stimulate economic recovery that we can do so through a green investment lens, as envisioned by the Green Deal, and so avoid the recovery and growth spend that locks us into carbon-intensive and otherwise unsustainable consumption and production behaviours and technologies. In closing, I'll leave you with a short reflection, and it's a slight air of caution. European Parliament folklore assigns a quote to one of the parliamentarians, and I'm afraid I do not know who, that is very relevant in the context of this panel discussion. The quote, when reflecting on the formulation of policies by the Union and subsequent implementation by member states, goes, "We are great midwives, but very poor parents." It is my earnest hope that the ambition of the Green Deal does not suffer this poor upbringing risk and is carried through to full maturity, as it is clear to me that the environment and by extension the health of our citizens will gain immeasurably. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jonathan. Well, you know, like parents, we can learn from experience too. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. Our next and final speaker is Karen Ciesielski. I hope I haven't murdered your name there, Karen. Karen is CEO of the Irish Environmental Network, with 20 years of experience in non-profit management, fundraising, communications, advocacy, and campaigning. Karen works to promote the interlinked principles of environmental, social, and economic sustainability by supporting IEN members. She also serves as the coordinator of the Environmental Pillar, which is a coalition which engages in environmental advocacy and policy activities at local, regional, national and international level. Karen, thank you very much for giving us your time this morning, and I give you the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, thank you. And excuse me, I think I have a few slides this morning. I can't see them. Are they live?
Yes, they are.
Super. Okay, excellent. Next slide, please, and I'll go ahead and kick off. Thank you. Good morning. I'm delighted to join you today to give a civil society stakeholder perspective on what the European Green Deal means for us here in Ireland. As Gerry mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Irish Environmental Network, an umbrella network that supports Irish environmental NGOs. Our 32 members represent a broad range of environmental issue areas, including habitat restoration, wildlife conservation, water quality, and climate action. And our members engage in activities including direct conservation projects, education, training, and campaigning. I've been speaking to our members to gather perspectives on the European Green Deal, which I'll share with you this morning. Next slide, please. The European Green Deal certainly offers broad ambition and can act as an important tool for us as civil society to hold decision makers to account in terms of our advocacy and campaigning, ultimately ensuring that we're doing everything we can to address the climate and biodiversity emergency declared by the Dáil last year. For example, the Farm to Fork strategy is a step in the right direction towards sustainable agriculture and includes a range of specific targets, including increasing organic farming and also reductions in the use of pesticides and fertilizers. The EU biodiversity strategy sets out a key target of 30% protected areas of land and sea in the EU, for example, and we now refer to these targets as the base minimum standard to which Ireland must adhere. And the 30% marine protected areas target has now been included in the programme for government. The circular economy package has set the direction of travel, which, speaking to some of our members, has urged the Irish government to potentially go further than they may have with our domestic waste strategy. For example, banning single-use plastics, placing greater responsibility with manufacturers to deal with items at end of life, as well as reuse and prevention targets. Major overhauls are being undertaken in key European policy areas, such as energy taxation and the emissions trading system. So there's an opportunity here to improve them. Other strengths include direct budget lines and the potential to secure funding in specific areas. For example, through the Just Transition Fund and the recently announced fund from the EPA to support circular economy projects. Crucially, we've seen a mainstreaming of sustainability principles into policy discussions. It's now widely acknowledged that environmental degradation is an existential crisis that we now need to address. So those are some of the positive aspects from the views of civil society members. Next slide, please. But the real question is, how can it result in real action here in Ireland? And just a very brief overview, building on what my colleague Jonathan Durham has said. In the terms of the current state of play here, we know we're not doing enough. We've missed 2020 targets around climate and biodiversity, and we're already off course to reach 2030 targets without urgent corrective actions. We've seen serious declines in the past decade in water and air quality, in habitats and species protection, and unsustainable fishing practices continue. The European Green Deal can form an important part of the change of direction needed in Ireland, but only with leadership and commitment. Otherwise, it won't have meaning or impact here. We have to close the gap between rhetoric and action, preventing backsliding or weakening. We've already seen targets watered down after extensive lobbying by vested interests. For example, there's a discussion now around what the definition of single use is. And we've seen the CAP negotiations and the vote in the European Parliament this week unfold and move away from sustainability and the objectives set out in the Farm to Fork strategy. We need policies that put communities and our planet first, ensuring they are Green Deal checked and do not support or incentivize harmful practices that are incompatible. For example, Our next agri-food strategy and CAP strategic plan are being developed now and must support farmers, communities, and nature while respecting ecological boundaries. Fisheries policy must follow scientific advice with sustainability at their core. We are also scant on details and are looking for guidance surrounding certain domestic actions. For example, we've set a specific target to reduce food waste by 50%, but we haven't detailed how that's going to happen. We must also look at EU economic and trade policies, which are still based around growth, even though there's mounting evidence that it's not possible to decouple aggregate growth from environmental harm in a way that allows us to act in the time that we have. The EU needs to adopt a plan for an economy that's focused on well-being and that works for everyone, including during periods of economic contraction. In terms of transport policy, we see a concentration mainly on switching to electric and hydrogen vehicles without acknowledging the need to shorten supply chains and look to different models of mobility. Funding must match ambition. Without it, these strategies are destined to fail. We also need to ensure clear direction and robust governance at European and domestic levels, incorporating openness and transparency in terms of policy designed to begin with at the outset, right through to implementation and oversight, and underpinned by legally binding targets. Clearly, what we see from today's attendance, there is a huge appetite to engage with the European Green Deal from civil society and many others. However, we don't currently have access to discussions and to what our representatives are saying at European Council meetings. We need more open and participative democracy as part of proper governance, and as civil society, clear pathways for engagement with the Commission, the European Council, and indeed with our public representatives at Parliament. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described the European Green Deal as potentially the man on the moon moment for Europe. But it's really important to remember that he didn't get there on his own. We need our own NASA control tower and comprehensive support systems with clear direction, leadership, commitment, binding targets, financing, and robust oversight. The voices of people demanding real action and systemic change, especially those of young people, are not going away and indeed are only growing louder. Thank you.
All three speakers we've covered the Green Deal from one end to the other there, and in fact you've covered many of the questions I see in front of me already. Now, so we go to the Q&A now. Keep your I have a number of questions already, but keep them coming in through www.slido. Yeah, it's there on the screen. In fact, the first question I'll deal with myself. I mentioned, and Joanna also mentioned, about the 12 stories on Ireland and the Green Deal, where there's a question as to where you can find them. In fact, you'll find them on the European Commission representation, the Dublin Commission representation website. They're there, and they'll also be running, the stories will be running across social media over the coming weeks. Now, any of the questions I see here, that I could put them to any of you, but I'll pick one victim each time, but the others, feel free to come in with any additional comments, whatever. Joanna, maybe I'll give you the first one. It's a question about how we can deliver on the European Green Deal goals when all of our European economies are trying to cope with the unprecedented disaster that's COVID.
I think one needs to dovetail into the other. We have to look at it as one goal. I think it's not just coming back. It's about building better or more resilience as well. And I think if we look at the way that the economic, shall we say, the financial leverage from the European Union has been taught up, the architecture, how it's being structured, you can see that the idea is to have a specific fund, which is the Next Generation EU Fund for the recovery, and a reinforced financial framework for 2021-2027, which will be the sort of financial powerhouse, if you like, from the EU budget. But I think more important than just the money, we're talking about, what are the criteria and what are the principles that will need to be followed in order for this money to become available in the first place. And so if you look at the recovery fund, the Recovery and Resilience Fund, for instance, it is clear that not only do the member states have to prioritize via the various tools, the multi-annual planning tools that they have, like, for instance, the climate and the energy plans, the plans for the restructuring and resilience fund itself. They have to prioritize the main ambitions of the Green Deal in planning the projects for which they would want to claim EU money. And I think that in itself already indicates that the prioritization and the way that it will be worked in-house as well in order for the approval progress, I think it shows already that it has to be the rethinking of economic activity in order to address the major environmental pressures and concerns that each member state has. In fact, for instance, if you look even at the European semester, if you look at how the cohesion funds are going to be panned out, they will be addressing both. Let's not forget that even if we look at biodiversity itself alone, more than half of the world's GDP depends on having biodiversity back in place. So can you imagine the amount of jobs that this will be creating? Can you imagine the amount of jobs that circular economy and therefore clean economy thinking and economic models will also create? So I think it's about, business unusual, as it were, in this regard, in order to think about the priorities which each member state has for the environment, not only Ireland. All the member states have their own priorities, which are detailed in the European semester process, but it's also about building more resilience and thinking about the jobs of the future.
Thank you, Joanna. I don't know, Karen or Jonathan, do you want to add anything on that one? Or
I can very quickly. In the new climate bill, of course, the carbon budgeting framework will drive departmental spending into the future, to be more focused on delivering a low carbon economy. And also there was really some very good guidance produced by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform and their economic policy unit there at the end of last year about for all departments, guidance on how to evaluate the sustainability of projects, not just doing cost-benefit analysis in the old traditional sense, but bringing in an environmental dimension into cost-benefit analysis for publicly funded projects. So I think, there is certainly evidence that there is a change in how public funds will be spent, but clearly, as the questioner states, we have an immediate and urgent priority, but when we start to rebuild the economy, we really have to leverage all the benefit we can by driving doing this through the green investment lens.
Gerry, if I may I add something to this? Just to say that from the Next Generation EU fund, 37% of the program will go directly, 37%, so that's really close to 40, for the Green Deal objectives. And 30% of the Next Generation EU will be raised through the green bonds. Now, what they will be concentrating on in these projects will not be far away from the economic activities that we are used to in the main economy. We're talking about, renovation way, for instance, in the construction sector. We're talking about hydrogen. We're talking about 1 million electric charging points. So we're looking at those lighthouse projects, which will be having a big impact. But even if we look at the construction sector itself, it has the opportunity through the Green Deal, and because of the situation we're in, where we need to think about resilience, it has the opportunity to go from a carbon resource, carbon source to a carbon sink, if they use organic materials and if smart technologies are deployed. And I think here again, we have an opportunity to be leading in Europe in order to have our architects, our artists, our engineers, our environmentalists, and designers at work to make it happen. So I think this is the way that we want to look at when we talk about, not only dealing with the pandemic and the economic downfall, but also renovating and investing in resilience through also the traditional industries, but them taking the opportunity to be themselves a beacon of addressing the environmental urgencies.
Okay.
Gerry, if I may come in as well, please.
Sure.
Great. Well, I think one thing that COVID has really shown us is the very fragile relationship that we have with nature and with our home, our planet. And we have now the need, and it is a necessity to build back our economies and our societies and our resilience, but it has to be in a way that is just, that is equitable, and that is adding in solutions that aim towards biodiversity protection and climate neutrality. We can't go back to business as usual. It's simply not an option at this stage. Thanks.
Okay, Karen, I may give you the honour on this one also, because you mentioned agriculture a few times. There's a question whether there's a conflict between the farm to fork policy objectives and trying to feed a growing world population, given that farm to fork is seen as being more extensive agriculture, more organic agriculture, less pesticides, less fertilizers, etc. And whether, can we square the circle? Can we feed a growing population and still respect the farm to fork strategy? Karen?
Yes, my answer would be yes. It is simply well, firstly, we create and produce more food now than we need to feed everyone. The real dilemma is the kind of food we produce, the supply chains that we have, and our models of agriculture. So we do need to, and this isn't about, placing blame on one sector or another. It's about working together to solve a very urgent biodiversity and climate crisis. So we need to ensure that the models of agriculture and feeding ourselves that we employ are indeed sustainable and take into account future generations while protecting nature and working within ecological boundaries.
Okay. Joanna, I might come back to you on this one because Karen...
May I add something on this?
Yes.
Because I agree 200% with what Karen said. This is not about apportioning blame. I think this is about looking at the issues, looking at where the pressures are coming from and addressing them together. And I think this is the point. I think, what we said earlier, that we really don't have a choice, that is business unusual. We have to acknowledge, what the reality is. Look where, if it's in Ireland, it's in agriculture and rural policy, that, the pressures are mostly coming from. If we look at greenhouse gas emissions, we look at ammonia, look at nutrients to water from agriculture, or productive habitats and species, then we have to acknowledge that we need to find solutions together. And of course, this needs to be addressed as such. Now, of course, if this is the overarching direction that we're all going towards, decarbonization, all giving our contribution, if you like, to that, then I think there are solutions if we want to find them. I mean, when you look at the plan that Ireland has submitted, the National Energy and Climate Plan, it's very welcome because it gives very clear and broad objectives. Of course, it talks about fossil fuels, it talks about renovation of housing stock, it talks about increasing the share of renewables, it talks about significantly increasing electric cars, all going in the right direction. But of course, it's at the end of the day, it's the how which will matter. And I think this is where we need to dedicate more energies towards.
Thank you. Joanna, because as Karen and Jonathan kind of covered this area in their answers, I'd like to get the next question through an answer through the Brussels lens. As to how the question is, how do you assess Ireland's environmental track record, and what should be the priority in the short to medium term now?
Is that for me? Is that
I was hoping you'd take it. Yes.
Yeah, of course. Well, how do we assess it? I mean, each country has its own issues. Each country has its own issues. You were mentioning in your introduction the amount of infringement proceedings, but I mean, you have to put everything in context. There are about 1,000 open cases about member states as we speak. for environmental liabilities, for environmental infringements. So I think what is important is that, we try to avoid as much as possible the infringements. I mean, and I think a lot of the front loading needs to be done in preventing the infringement to happen, in actually working together to find the solutions, because we know already where the pressures are coming from. So I believe that Ireland will be putting, its sectors, its resources together, and I would say it needs to be much more of a national approach, like in all the member states, not only in Ireland, that the solutions are found. We are much more investing, even as European Commission, in working with the member states, very much in advance of problems happening, in order for us to avoid that we need to take the court route. That is not the solution. The solution is avoiding that there is the issue, and also working towards going away from that issue forever. This is where we believe we need to work more.
Thank you, Joanna. And the next,
can I comment on that, Gerry, if I may? Yeah. There are both short-term and long-term challenges. If you look in the short term for Ireland, the immediate challenges are that only half of our surface waters, only half of the surface waters in the state are in satisfactory ecological condition. So, and our recovery rates at our standstill, but we have 33 places around Ireland, and particularly around the coast, actually, where raw sewage is discharging into the sea. This is 2020. We've been a member of the union for a long time, and but we're still pumping raw sewage into the sea, and that's really not acceptable. And we are allowing the combustion of smoky fuels in built-up areas, which have a direct impact on human health. So there are immediate things you can do that have very positive human health dividends, and that is secure drinking water supplies, stop the discharge of untreated sewage, and ban the combustion of solid fuels, particularly in built-up areas. They would have immediate returns for the population, and you can't emphasize an investment in the environment is an investment in human health, and we've got to continue to kind of bring that message home to people. There are longer term challenges, of course, and decarbonizing the economy and addressing our current model of agricultural production, because if you plot agricultural, or the increase in stocking density, there is a direct correlation with the increased pollutant load to surface waters. And so, it's that model is not working, and we have to redesign our production model. And yes, there is a growing population, not only here in Ireland. We've 1 million more people between now and the end of 2030. But we do have to feed humanity, but it is a nonsense to feed it at the expense of the other life-sustaining elements. Clean water, clean air, and preserving our landscape in a way that our agriculture and economy actually will thrive, because it needs the land, it needs biodiversity. So it's a nonsense to see them as polarities. They are integrated in a solution. Thank you.
Okay, Karen, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, certainly as civil society actors, we campaign for change and for, the development of sustainable policies. We also ensure that the public are aware of what's going on. And the use of the courts is one tool in our armory to ensure that Ireland does the right thing, and certainly taking complaints to the European Commission is also helpful to us as NGOs and civil society actors to really impact change and affect change in the long term. And just in terms of what Jonathan was saying, just building on the need for sustainable agriculture, I think we really need to ensure that we're supporting farmers to be part of that solution. For example, we're at 1% organic farming here. To achieve the 25% organic target as set out in Farm to Fork of 25% would be transformative. But in order to get there, we really need to provide direct supports, education and training to farmers and local communities throughout the country to make that happen. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Jonathan, maybe I'll give you this one. It's is Ireland lagging behind most member states in engaging on the circular economy, and what needs to be done about that? And anyone else, of course, can free to come in also.
It's a terribly challenging area. When you look at the data we have available, it's in around 10% of the raw materials we consume in our economy come from secondary resources, and that really is very low. We don't have a huge materials recovery industry. We're a small population, a small island nation. So, all our plastics go abroad, bar one or two small exceptions. They go abroad for recycling and recovery. We don't have a paper mill here. We don't have cardboard mills here. So all our paper and cardboard and our glass go abroad. We don't have any of these industries. So we don't have a kind of a national industry where we can trade these kind of secondary commodities. There's a huge challenge, particularly as a food producing nation. There are risks and challenges around using secondary materials in, say, food packaging. And that's a big concern for us. And also in pharmaceutical packaging, two of our kind of big trading areas, and in pharmaceuticals itself. So your economy has to be geared up to use secondary resources. There's a huge opportunity, I think, in our construction industry. We have to build a huge number of homes to house our population between now and the growing population. And I think that is a wide open field where we can, no pun intended, I apologize, where we can avail of the opportunity to use secondary resources in our building stock. I think that is an opportunity that we aren't fully tapping. There's a lot of nervousness around investors, and we will have all heard the pyrite concern and poor building materials and people now suffering from poor construction practices. And the integration of secondary resources into construction materials does represent a risk that we need to have assurances, standards, certifications, and that takes a long time. And there is still, I think, there's still a fair amount of risk and concern amongst investors that they prefer the assurance and the quality standards that go with primary materials. But that is work that Ireland and I suppose Europe has to do through end-of-waste standards, through certification schemes and life cycle analysis for materials. There's an awful lot of work to be done there, Gerry. And it is going to be a longer journey. But I think the biggest opportunity for us is going to be in our construction sector and also in our bioeconomy. They're the immediate opportunities, I think.
Okay. The next question, Joanna, I think it's probably for you. Should emission reduction, should it be looked at on a consolidated EU basis rather than on an individual member state basis?
Well, I would suppose that first we have to tackle at the national level. I think we need to have a system in place that is actually really addressing emissions trading and emissions targets. And I think we are not. I don't think we are. The time is ripe yet to have it at European level. I think the commitment needs to be done at national level first.
Okay. No other comments on that one. this could be for any of the speakers. Karen, maybe I'll let you lead on it, and if anyone else wants to come in on it, fine. Question is, how do we ensure more widespread adoption of green-based products without consumers having to pay a premium, or a greenium, as they say?
That's a really good question, and I think we can look at things in a few ways. Just going back to the circular economy question as well a little bit earlier, just building on what Jonathan mentioned, we are one of the worst offenders in Europe in terms of our plastic waste. So we need to look at reduction and prevention from the start. And in terms of green products, I think even in terms of product design, that needs to be brought into effect from the start. The thing is as well, some products may indeed cost more, and that is a fact. But through really strong measures around just transition, I think that's where we need to be looking, and through the lens of the SDGs, where we're looking to raise the well-being and quality of life for everybody living here. We also need to look at products that last longer, that can be repaired, and that can be used again. And that is another key element in closing the loop, in terms of supporting local jobs, in terms of repair and secondhand items. So I think the development of green products and products that last longer and are sustainable and that contribute to a circular economy is a fact of life. It is something that we will just have to get on with. We will need support, government support from European level to make that a reality here. But we don't have a choice. We're simply producing too much waste. We're throwing away too much stuff in terms of packaging, electrical goods, and we also don't value the goods that we have because they're cheap and because they don't cost a lot. So, but we would certainly, underline all of that with the fundamental belief that we have to look to just transition and to make sure that we're leaving no one behind as we move to carbon neutrality and to a more sustainable way of life. I hope that covers.
And I might add, Gerry, on that. I didn't cover it this morning just because of time, but the Green Deal has very strong commitments through the sustainable products policy, and that it hopes to move this dial where we can give consumers and purchasers reliable, comparable, and verifiable product information. And I mean, this is crucial really to avoid this risk of greenwashing. Now, there is an eco-labeling directive out there, but sadly at the moment, and I don't understand why, it's voluntary. It's not mandatory, and foods are excluded from it. So it's very difficult for consumers. I mean, I'm a consumer. It's very difficult for me when I go in and I can't see the carbon footprint of the vegetable I'm buying, or the piece of meat, or the block of cheese, or the box of cereal. I can't see this. So we have to move to give consumers clear signals about the sustainability of the products, so they have an opportunity to influence the market. The market won't change. I mean, the market will follow consumers. If we give consumers information, like we've done with white goods, we all now, when we go into to buy a fridge or a washing machine, it's very rare, I think, you would find any individual going in looking for a machine that's labeled E or F. We're all trying our best to go for A+, or A++, and this has a real positive influence on people. And sadly, that's a very narrow window of products and goods. So now I know there's World Trade Agreement challenges. We're having all these standards on products and goods that are imported into the Union. But it is something we do really have to push, and Europe has to lead on this, and the member states have to support it, where we have to give consumers, nothing is going to change in consumption patterns until consumers have clear information about the impact of their consumption practices. And linking back just to the circular economy thing, there's two things I forgot to mention there. that what is going to help us really also address not just on the individual household consumption, but the Green Deal has strong commitments to enhance the green public procurement elements across Europe. And the driving that will mean that anyone who's in, procurement in either in public services, and there's an enormous public service spend. So there's an opportunity through green public procurement to drive circular economy ambitions in a much more successful way than we're currently doing.
Thank you. Joanna, any plans, has the Commission any plans on labelling or the consumer?
Yes, in fact, I want to come in on that because it's very much in the pipeline, and definitely Jonathan has a really important point here about citizen empowerment and information. And this would be in itself, I think, increasing the dynamic towards, all the value chain, I would say, to actually be not compliant, but really be empowering the citizen to make the good choices. And we are, first of all, there will be a package on citizens' rights, as it were, and increasing their rights in order for them not only to, shall we say, be able to challenge or verify the green claims. As we know, there's a lot of green claims going on which are not true. But more importantly, is to actually empower the citizen with the information to make the right choices at the point of choice, at the point when there is a choice to be made. And it's not only about the retail and food, but it's really about everything else along the line. And this is why, for instance, we have a taxonomy regulation also, and all the delegated acts coming up. This is another way of how we influence where the money goes, which channels it should be following for which investments, and the ones that are not just greenwashing, but they are actually the ones who are respecting sustainability criteria a priori, even before actually proposing them. So this is a whole chain that's going on. We're doing a lot of work on what is called PEF, the product environmental footprint. So we're working with a lot of producers about this, who are very interested in really being not only the ones who are shining through, but really wanting to set the good example in action, with actually giving the right information to the consumers at the right time, at the time of choice. And this is how we can influence behavior going forward, not only of the consumer angle, but also from the point of view of where the money goes from the investor's point of view.
Thank you. Joanna, I think the next one falls to you. I'm sure it's a straightforward one for you. What will the Commission do if the national CAP strategic plans are not compliant with the Green Deal? That's straightforward, no?
Well, one has to see how they will pan out. But what we're doing right now is a lot of upstream work with the member states directly, with our colleagues as well, in not only in DG Agri, but also with other players who have an influence on establishing the right parameters for those strategic plans. Well, if they are not in line with the Green Deal, well, there's always infringement proceedings, I suppose, but one has to see what actually will happen in the individual cases, of course.
Okay. I have a question here on the community and voluntary sector, maybe for Karen. It can be for anyone, but I'll hand it to Karen. Will there be a role for the community and voluntary sector in the Green Deal and facilitating a just transition?
I hope so. We are, well, as civil society, we have several sort of official channels to dialogue and to decision making. We have called for a sort of just transition council that would include members of civil society to be involved, to make sure that the voices of communities throughout the country are heard and reflected in policies and plans going forward. As we all know, it's one thing to say that everyone needs to come along with us and no one should be left behind, but it's another thing altogether to actually make that a reality. And public participation is absolutely fundamental to get that right. It will strengthen the decisions and certainly the implementation of those decisions at local levels throughout the country. So I don't have a clear pathway at the moment as to how that will happen, but we certainly have been calling to be at the table and to be part of that process.
If I may add, Gerry, on that, we had some exemplar practices here in Ireland like the Citizens' Assembly, and also the Climate Dialogue, which ran for a couple of years, but sadly at the moment now it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And these were marvelous examples of going out and engaging with communities and interest groups and citizens around the country on, in that case, the Climate Dialogue was around matters of climate and how it impacted on them and how they could engage and their element in sort of navigating the way forward. The Green Deal has a very strong commitment towards fostering citizen engagement, and I would expect the Commission will be looking, when they look at the environmental implementation review for all the member states, will be saying and asking member states, to what extent are you engaging citizens in plotting and navigating the way forward? There's lots of associated elements to, say, the Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive, which has public engagement elements for all national plans and programs, and they're quite good, but there's really and I was involved in the Climate Dialogue discussions, down in communities in Kerry and elsewhere, and it's really quite an extraordinary to actually go into their communities. You're not sitting in Dublin and not throwing something out there and say, what do you think? You're actually going down and meeting folks in their home turf and chatting to them about, substantial issues that impact them, whether it's coastal erosion or flooding in your town. So I think the Green Deal commitments for the citizen engagement, I hope that they find a way into some, ongoing narrative between the Commission and member states, and that also reflects Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, which also requires that, member states or that signatories to the Accord engage with communities in education and dialogue around climate. So there's kind of parallel both through our UN commitments on the Paris Agreement, but also through the Green Deal.
Okay, Joanna, just before you answer that, closely related to that, and which you could cover as well, there's a question as to whether we'll see more citizen engagement in the next version of the LIFE programme. So those two things are closely linked there.
Okay, well, regarding citizen engagement, of course, if every member state decides, has its own way of organizing their public consultations and their involvement and engagement, but of course it's highly, highly encouraged, from the side of the European Union. This is where we really would like to, encourage member states to really dedicate resources for this. One thing that I wanted to say is that, of course, this will always avoid what I said before. Why should we go to the infringement route, or why do we go to the complaint route? And the problem on the ground remains the problem. So I think at the end of the day, the more that there is participation at the level of the citizens, organized sometimes even very well by mayors, I have to say. We have the very positive experience of the European Green Capital and the Green Leaf Awards that is now like 10 years old already, and where we see, plans which are drawn up by the different sectors of society within a city to address sustainability, to have a sustainability plan which addresses their concerns, and not only that, but to make actually proactively a proactive contribution to decarbonization and to biodiversity preservation and conservation, etc. So we really believe that this is the way forward, and I think the urban policy here needs to be also come into the picture. Just to also refer to what Jonathan was saying regarding circular economy, we have had good examples from various member states who have had a national circular economy action plan, which reflects, broadly speaking, the various actions that have been done at the European level, but translated into national actions, as it were. And that has involved, by definition, by default, the various actors of society really contributing there. Regarding the LIFE program, the LIFE program is actually being finalized at the moment. It will definitely be going in the direction of trying to get projects which have an impact. Again, the idea of lighthouse projects with the involvement, of course, as it has always been, with various a network of civil society organizations, and it will not change its DNA.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. We're coming close to the end now. There's a question here regarding the just transition. How can we implement the Green Deal in hand with commitments to end poverty and make a more inclusive society? That's a pretty broad question. Karen, do you want to lead off on that one?
Yeah, well, I think
it's unfair, but
it's a great question. It really is, and I think it is probably broader than we have time for this morning. We know we need to. The question of the how is where I think we really need to spend the time. So involving communities and finding out what they need in order to support them to move away from carbon heavy ways of transport, heating, energy needs to be really looked at. We also need to make sure that our carbon tax methods aren't regressive, and that they are and they are underpinned by research and data that shows where fuel poverty exists, for example, and where people need targeted supports. The last thing that we need in terms of civil society is to see a broadening gap in terms of inequality. It simply is not acceptable. We already have inequality in this country, and certainly the move to carbon neutrality, we would feel very strongly need to acknowledge that and to close the gap, and to make sure that families and communities are supported. I don't have the specific answer just today. I do know that we need to, as I said, ensure that policies aren't regressive, that they involve communities, that they are community-led, really, and tapping into, for example, the public participation networks, I think is a great way to start those discussions and ensure that policymaking is deliberative from the outset. So, I'd love to see a move from kind of consultations to more deliberative policymaking, ensuring that the public has a say from the outset of good policymaking. And that way it's stress tested as well, to make sure that, we're not doing one thing that has a knock-on effect that would harm our most vulnerable in society. Also, using the lens of the SDG framework is really useful to ensuring that we don't leave families and individuals behind, particularly in areas where there are challenges. So, for example, it's really difficult to say we all switch to not using petrol or diesel cars when we need infrastructure put in place to make sure that happens and that communities are supported. So I don't know if Jonathan and Joanna would like to come in while I try to consolidate my thoughts on this a little bit more.
I can. Thank you, Karen. I can add just a bit. We know, Gerry, we have definitive research that shows that there are environmental inequalities across society. Based when you correlate socioeconomic groups with environmental quality, there's a very clear there's a very strong alignment between poor air quality, lack of access to green and blue spaces, with poor sectors of society. So, and their environment is less desirable and less supporting of health and well-being. So these are things that we know and we can directly address through planning and zoning, and that will have to be included. And the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland has a really positive scheme of retrofitting homes from people of lower or economic ability, where they get the grants and they get the support. So that the home retrofit scheme has a very strong focus on poor families and households, and is helping there. But there's a whole broader area that does have to be included in this transition to a sort of a healthier society for all. Is there access to kind of a cleaner environment? And that has to be ongoing through how we address planning policy, I think.
Okay, as we're at the end, I see now we're actually out of time. Joanna, maybe on this one, and I'll give you the last word if you want to make a few comments on this question. Thank you.
Just one comment. Obviously, the wider the political consensus you would have had for any plan, for any actions, for any incentives, for any signals that you want to give, the more you're going to increase the possibility of ownership at the individual level, at the granular level of the individual. At the end of the day, most of this is actually personal, individual choice and shift of behavior. So, of course, having the plan alone doesn't matter much. It's about measuring it. It's about governance. It's about having an implementation method, which needs to be strong as well. And I think the citizens need to see that it's also stronger, that that their shift of behavior, their efforts towards that is being compensated with progress, measured progress going forward.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. Listen, sorry, we're at the end of our time. Apologies to all of those who submitted questions that we couldn't take. I mean, clearly, maybe we should have run it for a few hours, or we'll have to run one again. Which reminds me, there is a similar event taking place tomorrow, run by the Dutch Embassy at 1 o'clock. Tomorrow's Thursday, yeah, and it's a webinar on cycling with a focus on encouraging the young people to cycle, and you can sign up for that through the Dutch Embassy. So that's kind of in the same vein. Listen, I want to thank our three speakers, Joanna, Karen, and Jonathan. Thank you very much for giving us your time. It's very much appreciated. I mean, we could talk about this, ad infinitum, but the Green Deal and the climate change and the challenges, they're not going to go away tomorrow, unfortunately. But we're going to have more opportunities to address it again. Thanks to everybody who signed up. We had 360 or 370 participants. That's showing a very high level of interest. And thank you all for your participation. Thanks and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.